Welcome to everybody to our 36th meeting of Soteria, where we are going to read a short story by Sir Rider Haggard.
Not that short.
Called, well, a short story is as in one word, a short story, not necessarily a short story, by Sir Rider Haggard, called Smith and the Pharaohs.
That's can everyone see it?
Yes.
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 Excellent. I think Janine should be the first to go because
Can I make a procedural comment
yes, of course.
relating to my remark that it's not that short? I don't think we'll get through it unless we're selective.
All right. Well,
How long would it take to read? Because, okay, I see 27 pages. That is quite long. What sort of time perspective are we talking about?
I mean, the ideal, well, a good thing is that we have it as a file, so we can always read as far into it as we're comfortable with, and we can finish it off on our own. Everyone can have the text. So.
You think it's that good?
Well, we can decide.
Well, that's what we should decide. Yes,
exactly. I mean, people may, not wish to finish it off. We can just see how it goes, I think. But me personally, I'm not too keen on reading it for longer than about an hour and a half. But let's see. We'll
sort of aim at something like 15 pages and see how people feel.
Exactly.
Well, I would like to have a little bit of time set aside so we can talk about the material.
Yes.
And if you know what I'm saying, if we spend all the time reading it, we won't have any time to discuss.
Absolutely.
We should just break it up. I mean, half today and half next
Hear,
time.
hear, hear, hear.
Yeah, I think that's very wise. Let's.
Text. You said everybody had the text. I do not. Is there a place I can get?
Oh, I mean, can you not see it on the screen, AJ?
Oh, I thought you meant to finish reading it on our own.
Well, I mean, it can be forwarded afterwards, obviously.
Oh, okay.
I can. I mean, I've made a PDF file. So
It's on Gutenberg.
it is, but it's not in PDF format, and there I just made this. But yes, indeed, you're correct, Heward. It is. All right. Well, let's wait until a suitable juncture arises at sort of 50 or so minutes, and then we can. Or if anyone wants to say anything particular, I mean, yeah. Michael, do you not think it's appropriate that the person should, asked to stop and talk about if something comes up, or what?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, perhaps we should decide. Should we have that or discussion at the end? I think it might make a nice change if we did have people commenting, maybe at the end of each page. Otherwise, it would break up too much.
Yeah, I mean, I think we'll go on,
page by page,
until we've got to a reasonable point in the story. Otherwise, if there's anything particular that's come up, then anyone just jump in and we can have a discussion. All right then. Janine, would you start us off? Thanks.
Smith and the Pharaohs, Chapter 1. Scientists, or some scientists, for occasionally one learned persons differ from other learned persons, tell us they know all that is worth knowing about man, which statement, of course, includes woman. They trace him from his remotest origin. The text moved, I'm sorry.
I'll be moving up slowly, so yeah.
They show us how his bones changed and his shape modified. Also how, under the influence of his needs and passions, his intelligence developed from something very humble. They demonstrate conclusively that there is nothing in man which is the dissecting table, that the dissecting table will not explain, that his aspirations towards another life have their root in the fear of death, or, say others of them, in that of earthquake or thunder, that his affinities with the past are merely inherited from remote ancestors who lived in that past, perhaps a million years ago, and that everything noble about him is but the fruit of expediency or of a veneer of civilization, while everything base must be attributed to the instincts of his dominant and primeval nature. Man, in short, is an animal who, like every other animal, is finally subdued by his environment and takes his color from his surroundings, as cattle do from the red soil of Devon. Such are the facts. They, or some of them, declare. All the rest is rubbish. At times, we are inclined to agree with these sages, especially after it has been our privilege to attend a course of lectures on one of them. Then perhaps something comes within the range of our experience, which gives us pause and causes doubts, the old divine doubts, to arise again deep in our hearts, and with them a yet diviner hope. Perchance, when all is said, so we think to ourselves, man is something more than an animal. Perchance he has known the past, the far past, and will know the future, the far, far future. Perchance the dream is true, and so he does indeed possess what for convenience is called an immortal soul, that may manifest itself in one shape or another, that may sleep for ages, but waking or sleeping still remains itself, indestructible as the matter of the universe. An incident in the career of Mr. James Ebenezer Smith might well occasion such reflections, were any acquainted with its details, which until this, its setting forth, was not the case. Mr. Smith is a person who knows when to be silent. Still, undoubtedly, it gave cause for thought to one individual, namely, to him to whom it happened. Indeed, James Ebenezer Smith is still thinking over it, thinking very hard indeed. J.E. Smith was well born and well educated. When he was a good-looking and able young man at college, but before he had taken his degree, trouble came to him, the particulars of which do not matter, and he was thrown penniless, also friendless, upon the rocky bosom of the world. No, not quite friendless, for he had a godfather, a gentleman connected with business whose Christian name was Ebenezer. To him, as a last resource, Smith went, feeling that Ebenezer owed him something in return for the awful appellation wherewith he had been endowed in baptism. To a certain extent, Ebenezer recognized the obligation. He did nothing heroic, but he found his godson a clerkship in a bank, of which he was one of the directors, a modest clerkship and no more. Also, when he died a year later, he left him with £100 to be spent upon some souvenir. Smith, being of a practical turn of mind, instead of adorning himself with memorial jewelry for which he had no use, invested the £100 in an exceedingly promising speculation. As it happened, he was not misinformed, and his talent returned to him multiplied by 10. He repeated the experiment, and being in a position to know what he was doing with considerable success, by the time he was 30, he found himself possessed of a fortune of something over £25,000. Then, and this shows the wise and practical nature of the man, he stopped speculating and put his money in such a fashion that it brought him a safe and clear 4%. By this time, Smith, being an excellent man of business, was well up in the service of his bank, and yet only a clerk, it is true, but one who drew his £400 a year with prospects. In short, he was in a position to marry, had he wished to do so. As it happened, he did not wish, perhaps because, being very friendless, no lady who attracted him crossed his path, perhaps for other reasons. Shy and reserved in temperament, he confided only in himself. None, not even his superiors at the bank or the board of management, knew how well off he had become. No one visited him at the flat, which he was understood to occupy somewhere in the neighborhood of Putney. He belonged to no club and possessed not a single intimate. The blow which the world had dealt him in his early days, the harsh repulses and the rough treatment he had experienced, sank so deep into his sensitive soul that never again did he seek close converse of any kind. In fact, while still young, he fell into a condition of old bachelorhood of a refined type. Soon, however, Smith discovered, it was after he had given up speculating, that a man must have something to occupy his mind. He tried philanthropy, but found himself too sensitive for a business which so often resolved itself into rude inquiry as to the affairs of other people. After a struggle, therefore, he compromised with his conscience by setting aside a liberal portion of his income for anonymous distribution among deserving persons and objects. While still in this vacant frame of mind, Smith chanced one day, when the bank was closed, to drift into the British Museum, more to escape the vile weather that prevailed without than for any other reason. Wandering hither and thither at hazard, he found himself in the great gallery devoted to Egyptian stone objects and sculpture. The place bewildered him somewhat, for he knew nothing of Egyptology. Indeed, there remained upon his mind only a sense of wonderment, not unmixed with awe. It must have been a great people, he thought himself, that executed these works, and with the thought came a desire to know more about them. Yet he was going away when suddenly his eye fell upon a sculptured head of a woman which hung upon the wall.
Oh, thanks, Janine. Perhaps, or perhaps AJ, you would take
Okay.
up.
Yeah, or does
I
anyone
defer.
want to make a comment? As I've said, if we take it between each speaker, I just got to say, I thought it's excellent humour.
Yeah.
I find myself chuckling.
Yeah, I was. Yes, I also.
Even the name, Ebenezer Smith.
I had no idea that this was a comedic piece. So far, I found
No,
it
yes,
humorous.
what I'd read of him before wasn't humorous, but this definitely is.
Yeah, but no, yes, indeed.
I think it starts off very well indeed, but it does not maintain that quality.
Oh, that puts a damper on it. Yeah.
That is
I would be delighted to be proven wrong if I were.
All right. AJ, would you continue?
I'm not feeling that well this morning. I would prefer not to do any.
Yeah, sure, of course. Yeah, don't worry. In that, yeah, maybe we'll have a man's voice now. Perhaps you would continue. That's Smith.
I'll just read the last line of the previous paragraph and then go on.
Yet he was going away when suddenly his eye fell on the sculptured head of a woman which hung on the wall.
Smith looked at it once, twice, thrice, and at the third look he fell in love. Needless to say, he was not aware that such was his condition. He knew only that a change had come over him, and never could he forget the face which that carven mask portrayed. Perhaps it was not really beautiful, save for its wondrous and mystic smile. Perhaps the lips were too thick and the nostrils too broad. Yet to him that face was beauty itself, beauty which drew him as with a cart rope and awoke within him all sorts of wonderful imaginings, some of them so strange and tender that almost they partook of the nature of memories. He stared at the image, and the image smiled back sweetly at him, as doubtless it, or rather its original, for this was but a plaster cast, had smiled at nothingness in some tomb or hiding hole for over 30 centuries, and as the woman whose likeness it was had once smiled upon the world. A small, stout gentleman bustled up and in tones of authority addressed some workmen who were arranging a base for a neighboring statue. It occurred to Smith that he must be someone who knew about these objects. Overcoming his natural diffidence with an effort, he raised his hat and asked the gentleman if he could tell him who was the original of the mask. The official, who in fact was a very great man in the museum, glanced at Smith shrewdly, and seeing that his interest was genuine, answered, "I don't know. Nobody knows. She's been given several names, but none of them have authority. Perhaps one day the rest of the statue may be found, and then we shall learn, that is, if it is inscribed. Most likely, however, it has been burnt for lime long ago." "Then you can't tell me anything about her," said Smith. "Well, only a little. To begin with, that's a cast. The original is in the Cairo Museum. Mariette found it, I believe at Karnak, and gave it a name after his fashion. Probably she was a queen of the 18th dynasty by the work, but you can see her rank for herself from the broken uraeus." Smith did not stop him to explain that he had not the faintest idea what a uraeus might be, seeing that he was utterly unfamiliar with the snake-headed crest of Egyptian royalty. "You should go to Egypt and study the head for yourself. It is one of the most beautiful things that ever was found. Well, I must be off. Good day." And he bustled down the long gallery. Smith found his way upstairs and looked at mummies and other things. Somehow it hurt him to reflect that the owner of yonder sweet, alluring face must have become a mummy long, long before the Christian era. Mummies did not strike him as attractive. He returned to the statuary and stared at his plaster cast till one of the workmen remarked to his fellow that if he were the gent, he would go and have a look at a live for a change. Then Smith retired abashed. On his way home, he called at his bookseller's and ordered all the best works on Egyptology. When a day or two later they arrived in a packing case, together with a bill for £38, he was somewhat dismayed. Still, he tackled these books like a man, and being clever and industrious, within 3 months had a fair working knowledge of the subject and had even picked up a smattering of hieroglyphica. In January, that was at the end of these 3 months, Smith astonished his board of directors by applying for 10 weeks' leave. He who had hitherto been content with a fortnight in the year. When questioned, he explained that he'd been suffering from bronchitis and was advised to take a change in Egypt. "A very good idea," said the manager, "but I'm afraid you'll find it expensive. They fleece one in Egypt." "I know," answered Smith, "but I've saved a little and I have only myself to spend it upon." So Smith went to Egypt and saw the original of the beauteous head and 1,000 other fascinating things. Indeed, he did more, attaching himself to some excavators who were glad of his intelligent assistance. He actually dug for a month in the neighborhood of ancient Thebes, but without finding anything in particular. It was not until 2 years later that he made his great discovery, that which is known as Smith's tomb. Here it may be explained that the state of his health had become such as to necessitate an annual visit to Egypt, or so his superiors understood. However, as he asked for no summer holiday and was always ready to do another man's work or stop over time, he found it easy to arrange for these winter excursions. On this, his 3rd visit to Egypt, Smith obtained from the Director General of Antiquities at Cairo a license to dig upon his own account. Being already well known in the country as a skilled Egyptologist, that was granted upon the usual terms, namely that the Department of Antiquities should have a right to take any of the objects which might be found or all of them, if it so desired. Such preliminary matters having been arranged by correspondence, Smith, after a few days spent in the museum at Cairo, took the night train to Luxor, where he found his headman, an ex-dragoman named Mohammed, waiting for him and his Fellahin labourers already hired. There were but 40 of them, for his was a comparatively small venture. £300 was the amount he'd made up his mind to expend, and such a sum does not go far in excavations. During his visit, stop me when you want, by the way, of course. During his visit of the previous year, Smith had marked the place where he meant to dig. It was in the cemetery of Old Thebes, at the wild spot not far from the temple of Medinet Habu, that is known as the Valley of the Queens. Here, separated from the resting places of their royal lords by the bold mass of the intervening hill, some of the greatest ladies of Egypt have been laid to rest, and it was their tombs that Smith desired to investigate. As he knew well, some of these must yet remain to be discovered. Who could say? Fortune favours the bold. It might be that he would find the Holy Grail grave of that beauteous unknown royalty whose face had haunted him for 3 long years. For a whole month he dug without the slightest success. The spot that he selected had proved indeed to be the mouth of a tomb. After 25 days of laborious exploration, it was at length cleared out, and he stood in a rude, unfinished cave. The queen for whom it had been designed must have died quite young and been buried elsewhere, or she had chosen herself another sepulchre, or mayhap the rock had proved unsuitable for sculpture. Smith shrugged his shoulders and moved on, sinking trial pits and trenches here and there, still finding nothing. Some 2/3 of his time and money had been spent when at last the luck turned. One day towards evening, with some 6 of his best men, he was returning after a fruitless morning of labour, when something seemed to attract him towards a little wadi or bay in the hillside that was filled with tumbling rocks and with sand. There were scores of such places, and this one looked no more promising than the others had proved to be. Yet it attracted him. Thoroughly dispirited, he walked past it 20 paces or more, and then turned. "Where go you, sir?" asked his headman, Mohammed, pointed to the recess in the cliff. "No good, sir," said Mohammed. "No tomb there. Bedrock too near top. Too much water in there. Dead queen like keep dry." But Smith went on, and others followed obediently. He walked down the little slope of sand and boulders and examined the cliff. It was virgin rock. Never a tool mark was to be seen. Already the men were going when the same strange instinct that had drawn him to the spot caused him to take a spade from one of them, and he began to shovel away the sand from the face of the cliff. For here, for some unexplained reason, were no boulders or debris. Seeing their master, to whom they were attached, at work, they began to work too, and for 20 minutes or more dug on cheerfully enough just to humour him. Since all were sure there was no tomb, at length Smith ordered them to desist, for although they were now 6 foot down, the rock remained of the same virgin character. With an exclamation of disgust, he threw out a last shovelful of sand. The edge of his spade struck on something that projected. He cleared away a little more sand, and there appeared a rounded ledge which seemed to be a cornice. Calling back the men, he pointed to it, and without a word, all of them began to dig again. 5 minutes more of work made it clear that it was a cornice, and half an hour later there appeared the top of the doorway of a tomb. Shall I stop there? Somebody else?
Yes, thank you. You would maybe Edith, you'd like to continue.
Old people wall him up, said Mohammed, pointing to the flat stone set in mud for mortar, with which the doorway had been closed, and to the undecipherable impress upon the mud of the scarab seals of the officials whose duty it had been to close the last resting place of the royal dead forever. Perhaps Queen all right inside, he went on, receiving no answer to his remark. Perhaps, replied Smith briefly. Dig, man, dig, don't waste time in talking. So they dug on furiously till at length Smith saw something which caused him to groan aloud. There was a hole in the masonry. The tomb had been broken into. Mohammed saw it too, and examined the top of the aperture with his skilled eye. Very old thief, he said. Look, he tried to build up wall again, but ran away before he had time finished. And he pointed to certain flat stones which had been roughly and hurriedly replaced. Dig, dig, said Smith. 10 minutes more and the aperture was cleared. It was only just big enough to admit the body of a man. By now the sun was setting. Swiftly, swiftly, it seemed to tumble down the sky. 1 minute it was above the rough crest of the western hills behind them. The next, a great ball of glowing fire, it rested on their topmost ridge. Then it was gone. For an instant, a kind of green spark shone where it had been. This too went out, and the sudden Egyptian night was upon them. The Fellaheen muttered among themselves, and one or two of them wandered off on some pretext. The rest threw down their tools and looked at Smith. Men say they no light stop here. They're afraid of ghosts. Too many Afrits live in these tombs. That's what they say. Come back, finish tomorrow morning when it light. Very foolish people, these common Fellaheen, remarked Mohammed in a superior tone. Quite so, replied Smith, who knew well that nothing that he could offer would tempt his men to go on with the opening of a tomb after sunset. Let them go away. You and I will stop and watch the place till morning. Oh, sorry, sir, said Mohammed, but I not feel quite well inside. Think I've got fever. I go to camp and lie down and pray under plenty blanket. All right, go, said Smith, but if there's anyone who is not a coward, let him bring me my big coat, something to eat and drink, and the lantern that hangs in my tent. I will meet him there in the valley. Mohammed, though rather doubtfully, promised that this should be done, and after begging Smith to accompany them, lest the spirit of whoever slept in the tomb should work him a mischief during the night, they departed quickly enough. Smith lit his pipe, sat down on the sand and waited. Half an hour later, he heard a sound of singing, and through the darkness, which was dense, saw lights coming up the valley. Ah, my brave men, he thought to himself, and scrambled up the slope to meet them. He was right. These were his men, no less than 20 of them, for with a fewer number, they did not dare to face the ghosts which they believed haunted the valley after nightfall. Presently, the light from the lantern, which one of them carried, not Mohammed's, whose sickness had increased too suddenly to enable him to come, fell upon the tall form of Smith, who, dressed in his white working clothes, was leaning against a rock. Down went the lantern, and with a howl of terror, the brave company turned and fled. Sons of cowards, roared Smith after them in his most vigorous Arabic. It is I, your master, not an Afrit. They heard and by degrees crept back again. Then he perceived that in order to account for their number, each of them carried some article. Thus, one had the bread, another the lantern, another a tin of sardines, another the sardine opener, another a box of matches, another a bottle of beer, and so on. As even thus there were not enough things to go round, two of them bore his big coat between them, the first holding it by the sleeves and the second by the tail, as though it were a stretcher. Put them down, said Smith, and they obeyed. Now he added, run for your lives. I thought I heard two Afrits talking up there just now, of what they would do to any followers of the prophet who mock their gods, if perchance they should meet them in their holy place at night. This kindly counsel was accepted with much eagerness. In another minute, Smith was alone with the stars and the dying desert wind. Collecting his goods, or as many of them as he wanted, he thrust them into the pockets of the greatcoat and returned to the mouth of the tomb. Here he made his simple meal by the light of the lantern, and afterwards tried to go to sleep, but sleep he could not. Something always woke him, First it was a jackal howling amongst the rocks. Next a sandfly bit him in the ankle so sharply that he thought he must have been stung by a scorpion. Then, notwithstanding his warm coat, the cold got hold of him, for the clothes beneath were wet through with perspiration, and it occurred to him that unless he did something, he would probably contract an internal chill or perhaps fever. He rose and walked about. By now the moon was up, revealing all the sad wild scene in its every detail. The mystery of Egypt entered his soul and oppressed him. How much dead majesty lay in the hill upon which he stood? Were they all really dead, he wondered? Or were those Pharaohs right? Did their spirits still come forth at night and wander through the land where once they ruled? Of course, that was the Egyptian faith, according to which the Ka, or double, eternally haunted the place where its earthly counterpart had been laid to rest. When one came to think of it, beneath a mass of unintelligible symbolism, there was much in the Egyptian faith which it was hard for a Christian to disbelieve. Salvation through a Redeemer, for instance, and the resurrection of the body. Had he, Smith, not already written a treatise upon these points of similarity, which he proposed to publish one day, not under his own name? Well, he would not think of them now. The occasion seemed hardly fitting, scarcely fitting. They came home too pointedly to one who was engaged in violating a tomb. His mind, or rather his imagination, of which he had plenty, went off at a tangent. What sights had this place seen thousands of years ago? Once, thousands of years ago, a procession had wound up along the roadway, which was doubtless buried beneath the sand whereon he stood, towards the dark door of this sepulchre. He could see it as it passed in and out between the rocks. The priests, shaven-headed and robed in leopard skins, or some of them in pure white, bearing the mystic symbols of their office. The funeral sledge drawn by oxen, and on it the great rectangular case that contained the outer and inner coffins, and within them the mummy of some departed majesty. In the Egyptian formula, the hawk that had spread its wings and flown into the bosom of Osiris, god of death. Behind the mourners, rending the air with their lamentations. Then those who bore the funeral furniture and offerings. Then the high officers of state and the first priests of Amen and of the other gods. Then the sister queens leading by the hand a wandering child or two. Then the sons of Pharaoh, young men carrying the emblems of their rank. Lastly, walking alone, Pharaoh himself in his ceremonial robes, his apron, his double crown of linen surmounted by the golden snake, his inlaid bracelets and his heavy tinkling earrings. Pharaoh, his head bowed, his feet traveling wearily, and in his heart, what thoughts? Sorrow perhaps for her who had departed, yet he had other queens and fair women without count. Doubtless she was sweet and beautiful, but sweetness and beauty were not given to her alone. Moreover, was she not wont to cross his will and to question his divinity? No, surely it is not only of her that he thinks, her for whom he had prepared this splendid tomb with all things needful to unite her with the gods. Surely he thinks also of himself and that other tomb on the farther side of the hill, whereat the artists labor day by day. Yes, and have labored these many years. That tomb to which before so very long he too must travel in just this fashion, to seek his place beyond the doors of death, who lays his equal hand on king and queen and slave. I'll stop there.
All right, thanks very much. Michael, perhaps you would continue. Please.
The vision passed. It was so real that Smith thought he must have been dreaming. Well, he was awake now and colder than ever. Moreover, the jackals had multiplied. There were a whole pack of them and not far away. Look, one crossed in the ring of the lamplight, a slinking yellow beast that smelt the remains of dinner. Or perhaps it smelt himself. Moreover, there were bad characters who haunted these mountains, and he was alone and quite unarmed. Perhaps he ought to put out the light which advertised his whereabouts. It would be wise, and yet in this particular he rejected wisdom. After all, the light was some company. Since sleep seemed to be out of the question, he fell back upon poor humanity's other anodyne work, which has the incidental advantage of generating warmth. Seizing a shovel, he began to dig at the doorway of the tomb, whilst the jackals howled louder than ever in astonishment. They were not used to such a sight. For thousands of years, as the old moon above could have told, no man, or at least no solitary man, had dared to rob tombs at such an unnatural hour. When Smith had been digging for about 20 minutes, something tinkled on his shovel with a noise which sounded loud in that silence. A stone which may come in handy for the jackals, he thought to himself, shaking the sand slowly off the spade until it appeared. There it was, and not large enough to be of much service. Still, he picked it up and rubbed it in his hands to clear off the encrusting dirt. When he opened them, he saw that it was no stone, but a bronze. Osiris, reflected Smith, buried in front of the tomb to hallow the ground. No, an Isis. No, the head of a statuette, and a jolly good one too, at any rate in moonlight. Seems to have been gilded. And reaching out for the lamp, he held it over the object. Another minute and he found himself sitting at the bottom of the hole, lamp in one hand and statuette, or rather head, in the other. The Queen of Damask, he gasped. The same, by heavens, the very same. Oh, he could not be mistaken. There were the identical lips, a little thick and pouted, the identical nostrils, curved and quivering, but a little wide, the identical arched eyebrows and dreamy eyes set somewhat far apart. Above all, there was the identical alluring and mysterious smile. Only on this masterpiece of ancient art was set a whole crown of uri surrounding the entire head. Beneath the crown and pressed back behind the ears was a full-bottomed wig or royal headdress, of which the ends descended to the breasts. The statuette, that having been gilt, remained quite perfect and uncorroded, was broken just above the middle, apparently by a single violent blow, but the fracture was very clean. At once it occurred to Smith that it had been stolen from the tomb by a thief who thought it to be gold, that outside of the tomb doubt had overtaken him and caused him to break it upon a stone or otherwise. The rest was clear. Finding that it was but gold-washed bronze, he had thrown away the fragments rather than be at the pains of carrying them. This was his theory, probably not a correct one, as the sequel seems to show. Smith's first idea was to recover the other portion. He searched quite a long while, but without success. Neither then nor afterwards could it be found. He reflected that perhaps this lower half had remained in the thief's hand, who in his vexation had thrown it far away, leaving the head to lie where it fell. Again Smith examined this head, and more closely. Now he saw that just beneath the breasts was a delicately cut cartouche. Being by this time a master of hieroglyphics, he read it without trouble. It ran, "Ma me, great royal lady, beloved of," and here the cartouche was broken away. Ma me, or Ma me, he reflected. I never heard of a queen called Ma me, or Ma me, or Ma mu. She must be quite new to history. I wonder of whom she was beloved. Amen, or Horus, or Isis, probably. Of some god, I have no doubt. At least I hope so. He stared at the beautiful portrait in his hand, as once he had stared at the cast on the museum wall, and the beautiful portrait, emerging from the dust of ages, smiled back at him there in the solemn moonlight, as once the cast had smiled from the museum wall. Only that had been but a cast, whereas this was real. This had slept with the dead from whose features it had been fashioned, the dead who lay or who had lain within. A sudden resolution took hold of Smith. He would explore that tomb at once and alone. No one should accompany him on this, his first visit. It would be a sacrilege that anyone save himself should set foot there until he had looked on what it might contain. Why should he not enter? His lamp, of what is called the hurricane brand, was very good and bright, and would burn for many hours. Moreover, there had been time for the foul air to escape through the hole that they had cleared. Lastly, something seemed to call on him to come and see. He placed the bronze head in his breast pocket over his heart, and thrusting the lamp through the hole, looked down. Here there was no difficulty, since sand had drifted in to the level of the bottom of the aperture. Through it he struggled, to find himself upon a bed of sand that only just left him room to push himself along between it and the roof. A little further on, the passage was almost filled with mud. Muhammad had been right when, from his knowledge of the bedrock, he said that any tomb made in this place must be flooded. It had been flooded by some ancient rainstorm, and Smith began to fear that he would find it quite filled with soil caked as hard as iron. So indeed it was to a certain depth, a result that apparently had been anticipated by those who hollowed it, for this entrance shaft was left quite undecorated. Indeed, as Smith found afterwards, a hole had been dug beneath the doorway to allow the mud to enter after the burial was completed. Only a miscalculation had been made. The natural level of the mud did not quite reach the roof of the tomb, and therefore still left it open. After crawling for 40 feet or so over this caked mud, Smith suddenly found himself on a rising stair. Then he understood the plan. The tomb itself was on a higher level. Here began the paintings. Here the Queen Ma'ami, wearing her crowns and dressed in diaphanous garments, was presented to god after god. Between her figure and those of the divinities, the wall was covered with hieroglyphs, as fresh today as on that when the artist had limned them. A glance told him that they were extracts from the Book of the Dead. When the thief of bygone ages had broken into the tomb, probably not very long after the interment, the mud over which Smith had just crawled was still wet. This he could tell, since the clay from the rascal's feet remained upon the stairs, and that upon his fingers had stained the paintings on the wall against which he had supported himself. Indeed, in one place was an exact impression of his hand, showing its shape and even the lines of the skin. At the top of the flight of stairs ran another passage at a higher level, which the water had never reached, and to right and left were the beginnings of unfinished chambers. It was clear to him that this queen had died young. Her tomb, as she or the king had designed it, was never finished. A few more paces, and the passage enlarged itself into a hall about 30 feet square. The ceiling was decorated with vultures, their wings outspread, the looped cross of life hanging from their talons. On one wall, Her Majesty Ma'ami stood expectant, while Anubis weighed her heart against the feather of truth, and Thoth, the recorder, wrote down the verdict upon his tablets. All her titles were given to her here, such as great royal heiress, royal sister, royal wife, royal mother, lady of the two lands, palm branch of love, beautiful exceedingly. Smith read them hurriedly and noted that nowhere could he see the names of the king who had been her husband. It would almost seem as though this had been purposely omitted. On the other walls, Ma'ami, accompanied by her car or double, made offerings to the various gods, or uttered proprietary speeches to the hideous demons of the underworld, declaring their names to them and forcing them to say, "Pass on, thou art pure." Should I carry on, or is that enough?
I'll take it up then. It's fine, cool. Lastly, on the end wall, triumphant, all her trials done, she, the justified Osiris or spirit, was received by the god Osiris, savior of spirits. All these things Smith noted hurriedly as he swung the lamp to and fro in that hallowed place. Then he saw something else which filled him with dismay. On the floor of the chamber where the coffins had been, for this was the burial chamber, lay a heap of black fragments charred with fire. Instantly he understood. After the thief had done his work, he had burned the mummy cases and with them the body of the queen. There could be no doubt that this was so. For look, among the ashes lay some calcined human bones, while the roof above was blackened with smoke and cracked by the heat of the conflagration. There was nothing left for him to find. Oppressed with the closeness of the atmosphere, he sat down upon a little bench or table cut in the rock that evidently had been meant to receive offerings to the dead. Indeed, on it still lay the scorched remains of some votive flowers. Here, his lamp between his feet, he rested a while, staring at those calcined bones. See, yonder was the lower jaw, and in it some teeth, small, white, regular, and but little worn. Yes, she had died young. Then he turned to go, but disappointment and the holiness of the place overcame him. He could endure no more of it that night. Leaving the burial hall, he walked along the painted passage, the lamp swinging and his eyes fixed upon the floor. He was disheartened, and the paintings could wait till the morrow. He descended the steps and came to the foot of the mud slope. Here suddenly he perceived, projecting from some sand that had drifted down over the mud, what seemed to be the corner of a reed box or casket. To clear away the sand was easy, and yes, it was a basket, a foot or so in length. Such a basket as the old Egyptians used to contain the funeral figures, which are called ushapatis, or some other objects connected with the dead. It looked as though it had been dropped, for it lay upon its side. Smith opened it, not very hopefully, for surely nothing of value would have been abandoned thus. The first thing that met his eyes was a mummied hand, broken off at the wrist, a woman's little hand, most delicately shaped. It was withered and paper white, but the contour still remained. The long fingers were perfect and the almond-shaped nails had been stained with henna, as was the embalmer's fashion. On the hand were 2 gold rings, and for those rings it had been stolen. Smith looked at it for a long while, and his heart swelled within him, for there was the hand of that royal lady in his dreams. Indeed, he did more than look, he kissed it, and as his lips touched the holy relic, it seemed to him as though a wind, cold but scented, blew upon his brow. Then, growing fearful of the thoughts that arose within him, he hurried his mind back to the world, or rather to the examination of the basket. Here he found other objects roughly wrapped in fragments of mummy cloth that had been torn from the body of the queen. These it is needless to describe, for they are not to be seen in the gold room of the museum labelled Bijouterie de la Reine Marmée. 18th, Diswitium, yeah, came eventually. Diswitium dynasty, Thebes, Smith's tomb. It may be mentioned, however, that the set was incomplete. For instance, there was but one of the great gold ceremonial earrings fashioned like a group of pomegranate blooms, and the most beautiful of the necklaces had been torn in two. Half of it was missing. It was clear to Smith that only a portion of the precious objects which are buried with the mummy had been placed in this basket. Why had these been left where he found them? A little reflection made that clear also. Something had prompted the thief to destroy the desecrated body and its coffin with fire, probably in the hope of hiding his evil handiwork. Then he fled with his spoil. But he had forgotten how fiercely mummies and their trappings can burn. Or perhaps the thing was an accident. He must have had a lamp, and if its flame chanced to touch this bituminous tinder. At any rate, the smoke overtook the man in that narrow place as he began to climb the slippery slope of clay. In his haste, he dropped the basket and dared not return to search for it. It could wait till the morrow, when the fire would be out and the air pure. Only for this desecrator of the royal dead, that morrow never came, as was discovered afterwards. When at length Smith struggled into the open air, the stairs were paling before the dawn. An hour later, after the sky was well up, Mohammed recovered from his sickness and his myrmidons arrived. "I've been busy while you slept," said Smith, showing them the mummied hand, but not the rings which he had removed from the shrunk fingers. and the broken bronze was not the priceless jewelry which was hidden in his pockets. For the next 10 days, they dug the tomb and its approach were quite clear. In the sand at the head of a flight of steps which led down to the doorway, they found the skeleton of a man who evidently had been buried there in a hurried fashion. His skull was shattered by the blow of an axe, and the shaven scalp that still clung to it suggested that he might have been a priest. Muhammad thought, and Smith agreed with him, that this was the person who had violated the tomb. As he was escaping from it, the guards of that holy place surprised him after he had covered up the hole by which he had entered and purposed to return. There they executed him without trial and divided up the plunder, thinking that no more was to be found. Or perhaps his confederates killed him. Such at least were the theories advanced by Muhammad. Whether they were right or wrong, none will ever know. For instance, the skeleton may not have been that of the thief, though probability appears to point the other way. Nothing more was found in the tomb, not even a scarab or a mummy head. Smith spent the remainder of his time in photographing the pictures and copying the inscriptions, for which various reasons proved to be of extraordinary interest. Then, having reverently buried the charred bones of the Queen in a secret place of the sepulchre, he handed it over to the care of the local guardian of antiquities, paid off Muhammad and the Fellaheen, and departed from Cairo. With him went the wonderful jewels of which he had breathed no word, and another relic to him yet more precious, the hand of Her Majesty Ma-May, palm branch of love. And now follows the strange sequel of the story of Smith and the Queen Ma-May. Well, that is perhaps an appropriate point to exchange any thoughts. No one has any
Yeah.
thoughts?
Oh, well, people take a little time to collect themselves.
One thing I noticed, and we've all heard this about writing today, and that is this idea of show, not tell. And what I noticed about how this is written,
Yes.
the narrative is continuous without, and dialogue very scarce, to convey information, but it doesn't seem like an information dump. It seems like a narrative, but we don't have any of this kind of indirect, we don't have to interpret what is happening. The writer is telling us the story rather than all this convoluted showing things that modern literary people love in America. Why, I do not know. Anyway, I just, that's the thing that first stood out to me.
Oh, yes, you mean that he's interpreting the things at the same time as he's describing them. Is that what you're saying, Janine?
Yes, in other words, over here, especially in MFA programs, they encourage students to show the action rather than tell what is happening.
Yes, yeah, yes, yeah.
And what I notice about this story is it follows the narrative and very quickly, so that you move through the story without having to wade through the interminable metaphors and stuff that interrupt the flow of the narrative. And I really appreciate that, because it gets on with it.
Yeah, that's a good that is a good observation. It is much of the writing you do fiction, Janine. So that narrative approach is something that you take, just you're familiar with that. So this.
Well, what we are taught is that Americans write about feelings, whereas British writing is about events and things outside the internal internal conversations that people have with themselves.
Mm.
In other words, this writer makes no, he thought he's thinking, he's perhaps saying, maybe this is what happened, what the thief did. He's imagining all the possible scenarios where what we're taught is you infer how people feel from what they do.
Yes, I understand. Yes, it is a different style, isn't it? Yes. But Michael, what's your? Are you enjoying it?
Yes, I am. It's told somewhat in the style of 1001 Nights, I think, almost sort of appropriately. It's a tale of someone's adventures, not perhaps entirely happily between the romantic and the comic, because there's an element of both. And the writer seems a bit unsettled. And of course, some of the expressions are very much marked by the slang of the times, which is a polite way of saying seem very dated. But I think his ability to tell a story is unquestionable, and you're completely involved with the story and have an idea of where it could develop, although you can't be sure. And that is the exact situation to find yourself in, to enjoy a story, probably to have ideas about the way it's going to develop, but not to be certain. And I think it's thoroughly enjoyable and it's excellent.
There were quite a lot of linguistic points that struck me as unusual. He described the carven mask, which I found quite unusual. I mean, one would normally describe such a thing as a carved mask or something like. It's quite unusual to say a carved mask. He also used overtime adverbially. Now I think it's almost entirely used as a substantive. He did overtime. I'm doing overtime, and I think he said to stop overtime, which was unusual. That was something.
But are the unusual characteristics of his writing only unusual because he was writing when he was writing? I mean, I don't know when this was written. Or would they have been unusual at the time?
Yes, exactly. I don't know whether that's quite possibly it's not idiomatic of him, just of that time, but it's just something I observed. Does anyone know what a dragoman is? I think that came up.
Yes, where was that? It wasn't Muhammad his dragoman or something?
Yeah, something like that. What does that mean? Do you know?
Probably what we would call an aide de camp, as it were.
Yeah. Right.
It means an interpreter.
Oh,
really? Oh, okay. Well, that's
it's from what language? I mean, is that English?
Arabic and Turkish. It's Tarjum in Arabic and Turkoman in Turkish.
Yeah. Right. Is anyone familiar with? I don't know. Perhaps it's quite common. Mayhap, rather than maybe, or perhaps yes, mayhap. That was
mayhap.
Yeah.
Maybe. Yeah.
Yes.
I
think I've heard it once or twice.
Yeah.
But not from any writing of certainly not the last 50 years.
No.
Almost last 100.
I pasted a picture of the famous bust of Queen Nefertiti. The description, when he was giving a descriptor of the Queen's mask, it sounded like this was inspired by her face.
Yes, I thought that. Yes, that's
Also, the 18th dynasty in the Egyptian New Kingdom. Yeah.
Yes. I wonder what year that was discovered in. So that would be, if one knew, that one could confirm that was a possibility. Yes, what wasn't that discovered? Yes, yeah, sometime in advance. Yeah, I think that was already current then.
But when was this written, in fact?
I'm not sure that let's have a look on the.
My guess is it would have been in the first decade of the 20th century.
Because
He's a 19th century writer, but very
essentially,
late
yeah, but also, yeah, because the discovery in the Valley of Kings, I think, was in the 1920s.
Yes, I mean, Michael, did you read that biography of him? Did you not?
Yes, yes.
I mean, he was quite knowledgeable about.
Exceedingly, yes. He took part in digs, and he was fascinated by Egypt, and he was fascinated particularly by the religion of Egypt, by reincarnation. And the biography, unfortunately, concentrated on his political and economic activity and interests, much more than on his literary achievements.
Oh, really?
Oh, yes, yeah. The biographer wasn't very interested in his literature, and gleefully quoted the fact that he made a statement to that effect himself, that he didn't care much about his writing. But what writers say about their own writing is also not something you should necessarily take entirely seriously.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
Was he someone who had led quite an unsociable early life? I didn't really get that impression from the talk with.
No, I don't think so. He had a very sociable life, at least later on. I can't remember offhand about his childhood. I have actually given the biography away to my cousin, so I can't refer back to that. But I know, as far as I remember, he didn't have such a lonely life at all.
No, no. So
there we got it. 1920. Well, that is actually rather strange, isn't it? Because it's almost, that is an interesting fact in itself, because he wrote it shortly before, a few years before, I think, the major discoveries in Egypt.
No, Nefertiti's bust was found in 1912.
Oh, 12, I stand corrected. Okay.
1920.
Okay.
I pasted that information on the chat for you.
Thank you. No, that's good. That's good.
What I really like about his writing is the way that he takes terms that are not obviously, I don't know Arabic or anything like that, but the way he weaves those words into the story at the right place, where you do get the idea of what he's talking about from the context. And I wrote down a list of stuff that I want to look up. For instance, a mummy bead. I find that an interesting term. What's a mummy bead? Well, I'm going to have to look that up. And also, what struck me was the name of the God that he talks about, Amen. And of course, after prayer, we say Amen, right? So be it. And it's kind of interesting how the culture and the words, and I don't know if this is on purpose or if it's just happenstance, that kind of bleeds into terms that we understand now. I like that about the story. You know, I don't know what a fellaheen is.
Yeah, the fellaheen are the lowest class, aren't they? The lowest class in
really?
Hindu belief, aren't they the untouchables? I mean, also
no, I'm not. No,
but they're certainly the lowest class.
Lowest
neighbors, maybe.
Shudras.
Okay.
No, I think that's an Arabic term, definitely. But I don't know the meaning of it.
It just means peasant. Just means peasant or farmer, tiller. You know.
Oh,
it's mainly farmers.
You've been busy in the back room doing the research.
No, I know Arabic.
Oh, you know Arabic?
Oh, wonderful!
Oh, that's interesting. How do you know that?
I did it at university.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, really? That is interesting.
Did
you study Egyptology? I mean, was that part of your?
No, because Islam, the Arabs are a different part of the world altogether. Saudi Arabia.
Right. But I mean, did you study ancient cultures, or how did that?
Yes, I did classical Arabic. Actually, I agree with Michael's remark that it's like the 1001 Nights.
Yeah.
Because although that's seen as Arab, they just got it from India and then translated it into Arabic, and then it came into European languages. But we had our own traditions, you know. I mean, Stead knows, I'm sure, you know, the Norse legends, all the myths, the things. I mean, it's an ancient art of storytelling, which is people try to revive these days in England. There's some men going around, they, you know, they sit in the dark circles of children and teenagers and tell old stories verbally, you know. But this writing has that, you know, has that feel and that pace, which is difficult for intellectuals to achieve, I would have thought, because they tend to overthink things. I mean, you know, speaking of myself, you know, but it's kind of a ripping yarn, you know, it's what Michael calls a ripping yarn. But that's not to demean it, because this is this ancient form of human communication and wisdom, and usually oral, you know, but it's obviously the best ones get written down and transmitted that way as well. But that's the feel I get of the Arabian Nights, yes, and many similar things from other cultures, you know.
You get a sense of the
I have some problems with this.
Oh yes, please. I can see you've got your hand up, Heward. What problems have you encountered?
I've just trying to lower my hand. I believe that in his low-key way, he's seeking to convey a significantly uncanny process. And I mean, the denouement, which we may or may not get to today, I don't like very much at all. I don't think it lives up to what he's seeking to evoke. But also, I'm thinking, if you really want uncanny writing, the writing of H.P. Lovecraft is far more powerful than what he's managing here. And again, also parts of the writing of Conrad, particularly in parts of Nostromo, have an edge and a force. Even though they both, Lovecraft and Conrad, have a melodramatic element, nevertheless, the capacity in a low-key way to convey charge in their words seems to me much more powerful than Rider Haggard here.
Well,
so I've enjoyed this part of it, but in the scale of that kind of writing, I don't think it's of the first order.
I think that it would be very instructive if we did read something of similar length or scale by the two writers you mentioned. That would be interesting, and would work well, and that would be easy to obtain. Cheryl, Heward, have you actually read the entirety of this piece?
I read it in a somewhat hurried way, but I've essentially got the gist of it. Yes.
Oh, okay. I would don't.
No.
Okay.
I say I think that's perhaps a little bit unfair to compare this to Lovecraft or Conrad, because I think they're not doing exactly the same things. This is intended as so far as I understand it, a slightly whimsical, amusing, gripping, yarn tale that is not trying to convey, I would have thought, some
don't
deep
think-
message
I
of
don't think-
darkness, some sort of wish to impress people with the horror.
I don't think you'll think that when you've read the whole thing.
Okay, yeah. Okay, that's interesting. Now what's the time? It's time actually getting, yeah. It's 7:45.
Yes, this puts us in a kind of slightly difficult position. In a sense, it's almost a good place to start. Are there just 2 chapters? Presumably,
what page have we got?
I've got 11, so I would imagine that.
I think there are just 2 chapters.
Yeah.
So I think there's 2.
Well, what do people think? I mean, I, in a sense, would be quite in favour of
I
having
think,
a second meeting with the second reading, or you
yes,
could say,
yeah, I
if
think
people-
so. I think it would be good to, yeah, or people can, we all can finish it off at our own pace.
Well, that's the other option in a way, isn't it?
I'd be, I think that might be a good idea. I mean, we've.
I think it'd be too long to continue to read it to the end. Because then we would be really rather late.
Yeah.
I'm keen to continue reading it aloud in a group because I like doing that anyway.
Yes.
But also, it's particularly the style of writing, particularly
Lends itself to, yes, I agree. I agree.
And there is that conviviality, you know. It's the
Yes.
it's what these storytellers that go around England are trying to do, you know. Which is, it's an excellent thing.
How about we do it next Sunday at 6 o'clock?
Oh, I can't do next Sunday.
Yeah.
No.
Oh, you can't?
I certainly can't. I've got whole family visiting.
Well, ask them to join. No, I know you can't.
Well, what about Saturday? Is everybody booked for Saturday?
No,
Yeah.
I've got next weekend. I've got a full.
Oh,
I
the whole
can't.
week, right?
Although
can't.
actually Sunday, I suppose they almost will have gone by then. Yeah, perhaps Sunday I could actually. Although
I wouldn't want to. I'm actually giving a talk to another group on the Sunday.
Okay.
It would just be too overwhelming that soon.
Sure. Yeah, sure.
what about in a fortnight? That might. 2
Well,
weeks.
possibly.
AJ, do you have any thoughts on this?
Very precious to me.
No, as long as it's at this time, I can do it
Okay.
next month.
Okay. I think
Yeah.
let's Michael, you what's your thoughts?
Yeah, my thought is that we could definitely complete this because a month is rather long. I'm beginning to forget. And yeah, in 2 weeks for those of it's not obligation, obviously, but it would be good to have the same people
for 3 weeks, because I don't want it to be 2.
Yeah.
Okay, 3 weeks. Then I'll send out an invitation. 3 weeks.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, one thing I did want to ask and get feedback on this, because as it stands right now, I'm not quite sure where he's going. As you point out, you really can't figure it out, because why? Well, is the romance really the emphasis of the story? In other words, I just read a couple of in the next paragraph, there's a couple of sentences that makes me think that, you know, is this man going to come into true love back home, having confronted the, you know, the finger of death, having moved on? I mean, I really get the sense that part of this is his encounter with the historical record in terms of everybody passes, right? Where he says kings, queens, whoever you are, you're going to die. And I really get the sense of this man confronting history and all its import for our lives. And yet there is this sense of almost this melodramatic, you can almost see this as a silent movie of him, you know, falling in love with the hand. And it's like, I'm really enjoying this. I think this is a really good story in terms of
Janine, you think maybe the remark of one of the workmen about, you know, to him, perhaps you should look at some real women or live ones or something that you said that will perhaps be picked up. But okay, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, good. All right. Well, you know, we'll do that then, shall we, Michael? We'll
Yeah, fine. Also on a Sunday then at 6 o'clock.
Yes, and
3 weeks. Yeah.
Maybe other people that are not here can come.
Oh, obviously, yes.
Come up.
Yes.
Yeah. All right then. Good. Thanks so much.
Thanks everybody for coming.
Yeah, and
good to see so many people even at this late hour. I was worried maybe people would be put off by the late hour, but not at all. So.
Hugh, thanks for your comments, and I think it would be good to actually follow it up with maybe a short story by Conrad or something like that. Yeah, I would definitely like to do that. Or a writer of great quality like that.
So then when are we doing
Nice
this?
have met you, Edith.
It's 3 weeks, whichever date that is. Yeah.
All
right.
Sunday.
3 weeks. Sunday. Yes.
Oh, yeah, it's good to know that you're you know, you've got knowledge of Arabic, Edith. Oh, that's good. That's good. Well, that will form thoughts in our minds, what things we can ask you to do and do in the future. I think that's good. Yeah.
Oh no, I'm not really interested any longer. Yeah. So,
Oh well, that's interesting in itself. That's interesting in itself.
Yeah.
All right then. Thanks very much, everyone, and let's reconvene in 3 weeks' time.
All right.
All right.
Okay.
Till then.
All right. Bye bye.
Bye, everybody.
bye.
Bye bye. Bye bye.